Okay, so I kind of swore that I've talked about this before, but I don't think I've ever devoted an entire Tomcast to it, so I'm just going to do it now. I said this one's going to be about video games as collage. This sort of came up when I've talked with some people and tried to describe sort of like what a game is, and it really is sort of a mixed media thing. You're doing digital stuff, you have digital images, 3D digital artwork, you have 3D digital interactions, so you got like keyboards and controllers and all that stuff and screens. You are also doing a lot of like audio work, and then of course if you have stories and stuff like that, make references to things. It's all sort of like you're pulling in a bunch of, I wouldn't even just say references, but sometimes you're wholesale like taking bits and parts, especially when it's something like an asset flip or something. You're pulling all these things inside, and you're sort of making a game out of it. When you're pulling things in, and especially for me, I think I try to do this more than most, is I try to pull in things unique to my life or unique to my experience or unique things that only I have found. Things that can sort of be seen as my signatures. This kind of comes down to this word called idiosyncratic, which are basically the details and values of an individual. I think some people call this like a hyperfixation, but it's not really like your individual hyperfixations make the idiosyncratic. It's I think idiosyncratic is more maybe a nicer and more generous word for it. When you step back and you start to think of like a video game as a collage, you start asking this other question, which is like, what is a collage? I've been looking around a little bit at some stuff. I don't know if I have a great concrete definition, but there are some like interesting ideas that I've kind of come across when sort of looking at more traditional collages and sort of what they normally mean. And I think probably one of the biggest parts is that the collages always seem to emulate, I'm going to say pop. Pop is in like pop culture or popular ideas or zeitgeist or whatever. It's like it's all sort of happening sort of in there because you've taken something from that and you've brought it into your art. I kind of wrote down pop and I was trying to figure out like, well, how do you really describe that? And it's kind of for me, I can think of three different sort of angles to it. And one is sort of like the commercial angle, which is very much like someone is just trying to sell you a thing and get you to buy a product. Typically, it's sort of in like a mass market sort of affair. So they're kind of blaring out there and they're kind of constantly pushing out this idea. And I think there's sort of a slightly more insidious form of that, sort of the propaganda angle, or really just a political angle, which may not. Well, if you're going for power, then it's insidious. But if you're trying to change the world, maybe it's okay. But you sort of have that propaganda aspect of or that political aspect of collage, and you typically see that in a lot of like news reporting or sort of the stuff that you see on Time magazine. Like what's the stuff people are writing the articles about, and there's going to be photojournalism and stuff like that. It's kind of funny to think of that as like specifically propaganda. Sometimes they're just trying to get you to be informed, but honestly, everybody's got an angle, and many times that angle isn't necessarily like how they write the story or what the picture is like. A lot of times it's just what story they put out. Like that could be the politics right there. Just hey, look at all this stuff, which is kind of interesting. There's sort of a third element which I called like the mimetic element or like the meme element, which is sort of things that are more organically coming from social groups and social media, and it sort of represents sort of like a bottom up view of popular culture. In some ways, as the commercial and the propaganda is a very manufactured element. The mimetic is stuff that kind of people found and sort of were like, oh hey, this is either a real problem I have, or this is a like funny thing that we all notice now, something that's not making sense, and so they're sort of bubbling that back upwards, sort of against the stream. These are sort of all the sources that things come from when it comes from popular media. So these are like all the sources that come from a collage. And what the collage itself does as a piece of art, it recontextualizes all these items. And so it takes all these items sort of out of either its commercial propaganda, mimetic. It takes all of those out of that, and then it puts them into another frame, into another reference, and juxtaposes them against each other. So collage is going to be a bunch of things from these other areas. It's kind of recombined together to kind of say something else. And it could be they're not saying anything too radical, but other times it can be very radical. Artists using collages of like suburban home life and then opening a window to show like a war zone kind of thing, sort of a idea about how contemporary culture can be supported by atrocities from around the world. I guess I'd say like the next thing that is kind of happening with these collage elements is there's sort of a subconscious or surreal element to all of it. You're playing with sort of the mental ideas that are sort of occurring, in someone's head, and sort of, you can kind of take elements that you would associate one way, or that may be like getting in your head in a very deep sort of manner. You're taking those and you can sort of pull them out of that context and put them next to other things that either contrast them or that are the same. So you're contrasting them with things that either are the same element or are a contrasting element, and all of those can sort of kind of come together to sort of expose this idea of like maybe what something is that you didn't maybe realize. I used to say probably like the final thing that's really going on in a collage is that there's this, and this is maybe a little less interesting, but it's more the just straight up design element. It's all about layout, form, balance, color. It's all about these very I don't want to say necessarily formal, but it's just design principles that are going to be, in a way, you're not breaking any of these rules that would traditionally exist in other medias. So it's, I don't want to say it isn't radical, because in many ways it is, but it's not radical in the form of its design. It's still meant to be like picture in a sense that is appeasing in a sense, and in some ways that sort of design element that makes it, I'm going to say frictionless, because that's probably what the digital term for it would be. That frictionless element allows you to kind of see those other things, the recontextualization of items and the subconscious surreal elements that occur when you juxtapose things or put them against each other. That all means more when you're not drawing attention away from it with funny design choices. Sort of talking to other people about like what this means from, like, what are some other ways that like the collage comparison is made, and often you'll see it in like remixing music. I saw people say stuff like it's about making the old new again, and I don't know, that didn't really sound right to me. I'm not quite sure why, but it's mostly because, an old thing doesn't become new. It doesn't lose its interior context, right? It still came from either a commercial, propaganda, or mimetic sort of area. It just gets recontextualized, but it's still gonna have the connotations that it had that bring that subconscious or surreal element to it. So it doesn't necessarily make something new, but it lets you look at it in a new way, which, someone might say maybe that makes it new, but it feels new. I'll give you that. I guess really the final thing I really noticed about collage, and that's very true with games as well, is that in most like visual media, you just, it just is the medium, right? But in a collage, you're sort of allowed to use like words or text when you typically wouldn't do that. And in a video game, you can totally just like use words, use narration, just like cheap out and like, do like a few images or something that maybe don't necessarily seem like the high fidelity way of doing something. But if you want to have it happen, you want to get it, in the game, you can do that, and most people will accept it. And then also in games too, like, I guess I'll put it this way: you can say that a game can still work even when you've stripped down a lot of the details of it. So some collages are just like abstract shapes and forms and stuff like that, or just like paper cutout kind of stuff, colored pieces of paper. Abstract shapes still work in video games. Like, you can do stuff with very little, like gray boxes or orange box levels and stuff like that. You don't need to go so deep. And I guess probably like the final bit is that in collage, people do, they will just do traditional media if they need to. If they need to draw a thing or they need to do something, they'll just put it in there. And like, there's nothing to say in a video game that you can't do something bespoke or put in traditional media, as you need to. You can totally do that. There's maybe a question of like, what is traditional media in the context of a video game, but I don't know. I'll try to make this interactive and let you guys decide whatever you want that to be. Anyway, that's pretty much all my ideas that I had today about this concept of video games as collage, and how basically when you make a video game, you just put a bunch of stuff together and kind of seeing how people react to it and trying to organize that in a way that recontextualizes all the elements into something that's greater than the individual parts. But yeah, I think that's all I really want to say with this one.